Tony Blinken, I mean, look at the graphic that the New York Times created for this interview. How disturbing is this?
Oh, Jesus.
He's just kind of like there, and he looks kind of like personable. He looks like a kind and decent man.
I don't know about that. Maybe a mafia consigliere or something.
Or he looks like he's about to interrogate you and kiss you, and then you're gonna Clemenza's gonna come in and strangle you to death. And he may be speaking to you in French because quiet as kept. Tony Blinken grew up in Paris and is a Frenchman.
Yep.
The interview starts off with him being asked some pretty softball questions by his interviewer, who is Lulu Garcia Navarro. And Blinken is kind of whining about how Trump left them a disaster and they tried to get through it. But then she starts actually respectfully grilling him on Gaza. And I'm scrolling down to that section. Here we are. And she reads off the death toll to Tony Blinken. And I mean, 45,000, which is actually very conservative. It's at least 60,000 now. Almost 90% of Gaza's population is now displaced, consistent with characteristics of gen. Go ahead.
I have the clip if you want to watch the clip.
Yeah, let's do that.
Do you, Secretary Blinken, worry that perhaps you have been presiding over what the world will see as a genocide?
No, it's not.
How many seconds was that in between the question and the answer? If you're asked, are you presiding over a genocide, and you're not, that should be a pretty quick response. No, I'm not. But it took him like, I don't know, 2 or 3 seconds to say no, which I think is pretty damning in itself, along with the rest of the answer.
Yeah.
And then he goes,
play the rest of that answer.
Yes. So, and now you'll hear him even deny, of course, that it is a genocide.
No, it's not, first of all. Second, as to how the world sees it, I can't fully answer to that. But everyone has to look at the facts and draw their own conclusions from those facts. And my conclusions are clear.
Do you, Secretary Blinken, worry?
Yeah. So anyway, what a non-answer. Like everyone, it's very vague. Everyone's look at the facts and draw their own conclusions, but I've looked at them and no. I mean, he can't actually make a defense. It's not a genocide because he knows that it is. And he knows that he's speaking of drawing your own conclusions, he took his own experts' conclusions and he lied about them. He went before Congress and falsely claimed that Israel's not blocking humanitarian aid when his own experts had told him that Israel's doing exactly that. So this appeal to looking at the facts and drawing your own conclusions. I mean, he's someone who doesn't practice what he preaches because he explicitly lied and concealed that his own experts had warned him that Israel is blocking humanitarian aid as part of a genocide.
And here's more from Tony. Well, actually, on the topic of genocide, days after that interview came out, Tony Blinken declares that the RSF paramilitary and its allied militias in Sudan have committed genocide, costing tens of thousands of lives in less than 2 years. Look, I know horrific things have happened in Sudan and the RSF militia has killed many, many people. But do we have the same level of evidence relating to intent to commit genocide as we have from the Israeli government? 8 members of Knesset, including from the ruling Likud party, MK Ariel Kalner, just introduced a resolution to allow Israel to starve the Gaza population, prevent water from entering. I mean, it's all there. It's all, these are like future exhibitions in the Gaza Holocaust Memorial Museum that are being pumped out by the Israeli Knesset, the Israeli government every day. And Tony Blinken denies that it's a genocide. Why? Because number one, he's responsible for it. And number two, they're Jewish. And he just can't allow that to take place as the son-in-law and grandson of Israel lobbyists. Then you have Tony Blinken recounting all of the valiant efforts that he made in his interview to stop this non-genocide. And this is so telling, this section. He said, the very first trip that I made to Israel 5 days after October 7th, I spent with my team 9 hours in the IDF's headquarters in Tel Aviv, Hakiria, 6 stories underground with the Israeli government, including the prime minister, including arguing for hours on end about the basic proposition that the humanitarian assistance needed to get to Palestinians in Gaza. And that was an argument that took place because you had in Israel in the days after October 7th, a totally traumatized society. This wasn't just the prime minister or a given leader in Israel. This was an entire society that didn't want any assistance getting to a single Palestinian in Gaza. I argued that for 9 hours. So there's so many layers here. But first, he's acknowledging all of Israel is genocidal while denying there's a genocide. They're allowed to be genocidal because they're traumatized. Do you ever hear him talk about Palestinians in that way, calling them traumatized people who've been under occupation for 70 years, who've been ethnically cleansed, who are living in an open air prison camp behind electrified walls with machine guns on their towers? No. And what is he doing arguing with the leaders of a country that has like 7 or 8 million citizens, or maybe 10 million citizens, many of them living around the world, when you are the Secretary of State of the most powerful country in human history, and you're arguing with them, please, can you allow some water bottles in there and some diapers? Like, I would just love if you would if you would do that, I'll give you so many bombs. You're going to get you're going to have the biggest bombs. You're going to drop them on so many Palestinians, but why doesn't he use the point of leverage that would actually force them to do that, or would have forced a hostage deal immediately that would have spared all the killing? Because he can't. That exposes him. This whole passage exposes Tony Blinken as a gigantic fraud and not a diplomat. The diplomat would have used leverage, the diplomat of a powerful country like and he's never once used that leverage.
The worst part is he made that statement that I tried, but I argued for hours, and of course it was a utter failure. But he's trying to get the crowd, the public on his side, to view him as a compassionate person, when in fact he's presiding over the worst slaughter imaginable. So he has all the traits of maybe get Jordan Peterson in for the psychoanalysis, but a covert narcissist or something like that. But Blinken is just very manipulative in his demeanor and how he sort of positions himself. Yeah. And he's not going to be able to escape history. He'll get a worse treatment than Henry Kissinger, I predict, for the Gen Zers.
Inshallah. Aaron, what's Tony Blinken's next act going to be? What do you predict?
Well, before he joined the Biden administration, he was at what they called West Exec Advisors, a consulting firm profiting over global misery of the variety that he now spreads. And also he was a columnist at the New York Times. He would write regular pieces for the New York Times, including, I remember he wrote one basically throwing Obama under the bus because, who Blinken served under, because Obama wouldn't send the level of weapons to Ukraine that Blinken wanted. So Blinken was doing things like throwing his own former boss under the bus for not being enough of a warmonger. So I suspect he'll return to that line of work, profiting off of death and misery, and then writing think pieces for liberal audiences to justify it.
Do you think he'll launch a podcast, one-on-one with Tony?
I think that's a fair bet. Yes, I do.
Possible. Maybe some he'll have a Patreon page to give guitar lessons.
Oh.
Be jamming with Neil Young and all his idols.
He's already extremely wealthy. A lot of it's inherited. I drive by his house sometimes. I was kind of peripherally around Kibbutz Blinken, the protest movement outside his home. It's an enormous mansion overlooking the Potomac on Chainbridge Road, and it's 5 minutes down the road from the CIA, from Langley. And Patrick, you mentioned how the Tesla is a status symbol inside the Beltway. When you drive by the CIA, you just on a work day, you see like an endless line of Teslas with Ukraine flags on them. Just like it's the whole research department, and they're all Democrats. Then Blinken's like right down the road. And I mean, across the street from him is a house that's been on the market. It's like $40 million for sale. He has enormous amounts of money. So I think he may go into like a teaching position at Harvard. That's what Hillary did at Columbia. And the students who made Hillary's life uncomfortable at Columbia deserve enormous amounts of respect because they won't allow this to be normalized. And Tony Blinken should not be allowed to have a moment of peace once he leaves the administration. We can't forget what he did. Any institution he enters should be considered poisoned and fundamentally toxic because he is a soft-handed, sociopathic war criminal on par with the worst criminals in history for what he's done in Gaza. Because again, could have ended it with one phone call. He could have done it. And he constantly claims Biden was in charge of everything. Come on. And Biden considers Tony Blinken kind of like a surrogate son, like, you know, the son he wished Hunter Biden had been. So Tony Blinken had enormous amounts of leverage with Biden as well. These figures, I mean, how long does it have to go on for? Like, what is the objective? And what has Israel gotten, really? I mean, they've destroyed Gaza. They're still getting attacked from the rear by Al-Qassam and Palestinian Islamic Jihad fighters. They haven't stamped them out. There's a new article in Jerusalem Post claiming Hamas has replenished its ranks and now has 23,000 fighters, faster than they've been eliminated. That Netanyahu's numbers are all off. You can see videos of operations every day. And Israel is the pariah state it deserves to be, and they still have their hostages there. This is also a strategic failure on the part of Blinken, who claimed coming into office that he cared so much about Israel and that he was there to save them and push a two-state solution. So, not in addition to being just from a moral perspective, a massive criminal and a villain of history. Strategically and diplomatically, he's a failure, which is something that I think distinguishes him from Kissinger, who left the Nixon administration with the triumph of Nixon going to China and the Sino-Soviet split. No matter what,
he could follow the footsteps of Tony Blair, who's a equally despicable type of character. But Tony Blair carved out a Middle East envoy kind of career for a good decade with Tony Blair and Associates, took over the whole 7th floor of the King David Hotel or something, or one of those in Jerusalem. And he set himself up as the kind of middleman for everything. And I think Blinken might attempt something like this. I just have a suspicion looking at the type of person he is.
Yeah, and I mean, the normalization between Israel and the Saudis and the UAE gives him the contacts he needs to become a middleman and to rake in tons of contracts the way Tony Blinken did, where I think it was at the American Colony Hotel. Tony Blair did. He was at the American Colony Hotel in East Jerusalem, and he was a lobbyist for JP Morgan, and then he would bring in the contract for the UAE to take over the Palestinian telecom company like Al Watan, and then he would get all the kickbacks behind the guise of trying to negotiate peace with this massive staff there. That's a good guess, but it'll be fascinating and outrageous to see what the Biden people do after they leave office. Also, Samantha Power, one of the biggest moral frauds of the administration.
She's at Harvard.
Yep. She'll go back to Harvard, Kennedy School. Poisonous institutions. And Trump and his team will manage to make them look like the adults in the room after he's done. That's my prediction. Aaron, me and Patrick were talking a lot about what we expect from the Trump administration. Any thoughts before we go on what we have to look forward to?
just as we're talking about Blinken and his plans and the incoming circle around Trump, I'm just reminded of what Hannibal of the A-Team said in the A-Team's last episode. He said, why there's a world of slime balls out there. And that's all I could think of right now. Is there's a lot of slime balls in both parties. And they're in charge.